All right, you got the Geckoman here, and I'm stepping in to take over the Redline Report with my buddy Brian Kusko. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's middle of Sunday, and we got a few hours left in the show. And considering how many times I've been at these shows at this time, I'm doing way better than I used to be doing about this time.
You know what? I gotta agree. Although I think we had a pretty epic start to the day.
Yeah,
I mean, that was amazing.
it was.
For those of you who don't know, we had a prayer service this morning. Brian kind of, got us started. We had a wonderful seminary student. What was his name?
Zach Melton.
Yep, Zach. He came in and actually gave us a fantastic sermon. We sung a couple of hymns with your help playing the guitar and leading us. How can you not enjoy a Sunday that starts out like that?
Yeah, fair point, man. It was truly by the grace of God that we got in there, and there was no reason that the guy whose job it was to keep people out of the building, his literal job, he's on a radio walkie-talkie, literally being told to lock the doors and keep people out, he let us in.
Yes. Which, you know what? When you think about that for a second, that's really all we have to do is let the person, God, it's not a person, but...
Well, in one sense.
We work really, really hard keeping him out. And all we have to do is let him in. And, as a prime example, through his power, we were able to get into the building, have our wonderful service, and that just started it out, pretty epically. You had this big announcement, the whole Redline Report, and you've been doing interviews all weekend long. So what are you thinking so far? How's it going?
It's going pretty well. It's not my first rodeo doing a bunch of interviews at a show. I've done that a number of times. I've been doing it for years at this point. It is kind of how I got my start in shows. The very first show I went to, I didn't really film it. I just went. But then shortly after that, when I started YouTube stuff, I was like, I think I'm going to go in and do interviews with people. And so going from where I was then, rolling around with kind of this setup, bringing it to people's booths and setting it up and doing a quick interview and breaking it down and trying to go find somebody else, from that to having people come to me and having a dedicated spot where I'm actually able to just interview people and they can all come to me all day, is amazing.
Yeah, that's really pretty cool, and you got a great spot for it here. You're right in the middle of all the action, so everybody coming into the show is seeing what you're doing. So, I got to say, I think you were pretty blessed in that aspect of it too.
Yeah, no doubt.
So
no doubt.
It's pretty awesome. You and I were talking, and you were telling me about how this all lined up time-wise for you. So tell me about that.
You mean as far as like this is concerned, or just like everything?
Well, like your relationship with the Reptile Report. How did that all get kicked off?
Well, I didn't know. I kind of caught wind about the Reptile Report when I was, a lot of reptile content and reptile world stuff was hitting me like a tidal wave when I first moved back from Hawaii. Decided to look up stuff on the internet and hitting Snake Bites TV and Kevin's book. Just like I felt like I was getting avalanched with like reptile stuff. So Reptile Report was part of that. When I started making content, it was one of the first things I found. It was just a reticulated python like shedding, but I put it to like music and a time lapse, and I slowed it up. And it was when I still really to this day I geek out on editing, but.
Right.
It was just another one of those moments along the journey where I was geeking out on being able to slow the footage way down and then speed it up and slow it down in clips. Like you see her go by the thing and she kind of like is rubbing her nose to get that first piece off, and then
right,
time lapse style and back to slow motion. It was so cool and fun to do. And then for whatever reason, Reptile Report thought it was cool too, and like picked it up and shared it on their platform. And it was my first piece of content to go viral.
Yeah,
and because of them doing that, and the timing there was that. When we decided, first of all, that was part of the idea behind the name, because the person behind Redline and the Reptile Report is Robin Markland.
Yes.
And when I decided and proposed to him, and he accepted that I wanted to rebrand Triple B TV to Redline Report, and we agreed that was going to be a thing. When we finally sat down to record the first content that would go on Redline Report, I got a notification on Facebook that day that said 8 years ago, Reptile Report shared this thing. I made I'd made a text post on Facebook saying, "Wow, thank you, Reptile Report, for like sharing that content and making it go viral." And I had made that post that same day that we recorded the first content for Redline Report. And then the evening, you were with me as I was uploading the footage in the hotel, I was realizing that the very last piece of content on Triple B TV was called Redline Phase, and it was with Robin. And that was the last piece of content that had been uploaded to that channel. So on that day, a year ago. So it's just...
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really cool that it all lined up in that timeline for you.
And I think the Lord knows that I really geek out on stuff like that. Like when things line up and timing is all like he just knows my heart to where when things like that happen, I'm like, he just knows I'm going to be like, oh, look, the guy let us in the building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he definitely knows our heart, that's for sure. So, on the personal side, do you have any big projects you're working with this year?
This is the biggest project this year so far, I'd say. Breeding-wise, I've kind of like dialed it back just a little bit, just focused on some of the stuff I was already doing with Clown Pie and Sunset and making sure that some of those pairings are happening. I do have a really cool female that I actually got at this show back in 2018, I think it was, a girl that was produced in 2017 by my buddy Graham Henegriffs of Hetty Herps. I got a pair of, not a pair, but 2 different female het clowns off of him. One who has produced for me for the first time 2 seasons ago, and this other girl who, like I said, she's probably a 2017 girl and finding out in 2024 is producing her first clutch, is probably about to lay. She might have laid by the time I get home. So I'm excited to see that.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
You're going to have to send me a picture if she did.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I really enjoy your channel. I love the fact that you bring your faith into it. I also love the fact that you bring your family into it. So when did you decide to make that decision to really bring both of those into your channel?
Well, the faith came a lot later because the family came in pretty shortly after. The first couple of videos I put to Triple B TV were just me having a GoPro on my forehead and unboxing a snake from Mike Wilbanks, I believe was the first one. It was,
okay.
Which Mike actually has been a very heavy encourager of me of sharing faith on the, like when he saw I was doing that, he came in just
that's awesome.
Like just really strongly encouraging me, like, I'm really glad you're doing that, and I'm just super happy that that's happening. So that was cool too. That's just another one of those things where guys like, oh, I had no idea at that time, but anyway, so I made a few videos like that, and then I decided I was going to go in front of the camera and talk to it instead of like, doing the POV thing or whatever. And that was pretty quick into the beginning of the channel. And it was in that video that I did a bunch of B-roll and started my journey of making cinematic masterpieces. I was, really put a lot of production effort into it with like the different transitions and like all the different B-roll clips. And my family was in there. It was my son Noah was about 2.5 to 3, and Eli, who's now 8, was a fresh baby, and they're in the shot. And I'm say something about like, I'm talking about my idea to start breeding snakes, and that's like kind of the first real episode of Triple B TV. And so I show B-roll them. I say something to the effect of, I figure if I'm able at this point to raise human babies, then why couldn't I do snakes too? That seems like it'd be a lot easier.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which in some ways it is. Some ways not, but in many ways it is. So there's that. And then as far as sharing faith, that came much later because I didn't actually come to know Jesus Christ as God until, was that 2022? 2021?
Okay.
September. And it was not too long after that I was reading a book called The Real God. And at the end of the 3rd chapter in that book, the author invites you to close your eyes and take 3 minutes to be silent with your eyes closed and just ask God to speak to you, which was a pretty cool little moment in the book.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm here I was in the hotel with my parents who had just gone to my uncle's service, and I was just laying there, and I was like, all right, close my eyes. And it was like almost the second, I was expecting to just kind of sit and wait and like have a little meditative moment or whatever. It was like the second my eyes closed, he was just like, why don't you talk about what's been going on with me and you on your video, your next video you put out. Oh. And it was like clear as day. It was like, sometimes when you hear the voice of the Lord, there's a lot of talk about that, like what that sounds like for people. A lot of people hear a whisper, that gentle push, a whisper. Mm-hmm. This was gentle but also immediate. Just like clear as day. It was like there's no denying. He was just like, why don't you just share about what I'm doing in your life right now on your next video? And I said, okay.
That is very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think back to I was raised in a Christian home, and pretty much went to church every week, 2-3 times a week. And when I became a teenager, I kind of stepped away, and still believed in God, still believed in Christ, but wasn't necessarily following Him. And that continued. I'd go to church at random from time to time, but that continued until about 10 years ago. My wife had a falling out with some of her family members, and her brother called her and asked her, would you want to go to church tomorrow? And my wife was not necessarily a quote-unquote believer at that point. And she went because she thought, well, this is my brother trying to reach out to us. And the next thing I know, she comes home and she's like, I think I want to start going to church. Would you go with me? And I was blown away because she had never asked that before. And I said, well, if that's what you want to do, hon, I'll start going to church with you. But I think I was still fighting it and wasn't fully committed to it. As a matter of fact, one Sunday I didn't go. And you talk about God smacking you in the face sometimes. She came home and said, I accepted Christ today. And I was blown away. And I knew at that point I needed to start, and I'm breaking up here, but I needed to start going to church with her. And now my oldest daughter goes to church with us. She's accepted Christ, was baptized. And it's a beautiful thing. I know I'm crying or about to start crying, but it's tears of joy, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I know those tears well.
And I have to tell you, I really think part of that also recently helped with watching your videos and you talking about your faith. And really appreciate that. And I think at this point, I'd like to say thanks for, letting me take over the set and do an interview with you. And I love you, brother.
Love you too, man. Love you too.
All right.
That's what we're here for. We got to encourage each other.
You got it.
And that's why I think that when he asks us to step out, that it's important that we do, because we never know who else we might be helping just by not being silent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I think that'll do it.